The HOA president stood in my driveway, laughing at the flood wall I'd spent my entire retirement savings building. And less than 20 minutes later, I watched muddy storm water pour through the front doors of his $750,000 house while he screamed for somebody to save his leather furniture. Funny thing is, none of that would have happened if those people had just left me and my wife alone. But folks drunk on power usually mistake kindness for weakness, and out here in Cypress Ridge Estates, weakness was something the wealthy smelled like blood in the water. My name's Walter Grady. I'm 68 years old, retired pipe fitter, former Army Corps maintenance supervisor, and for most of my life I believed if you kept your head down, worked hard, and treated people decent, eventually life would return the favor. Turns out life does, but sometimes it takes the long road getting there. My wife Elaine and I moved into Cypress Ridge just outside San Antonio after her diagnosis. Early-stage dementia. One of those phrases doctors say softly, like lowering their voice somehow, makes it hurt less. We sold our old place because the stairs got dangerous and the neighborhood had gone downhill anyway. Cypress Ridge looked peaceful when we first arrived. Trimmed lawns, little ponds with ducks, kids riding bikes in circles while their parents drank wine on polished patios pretending life was perfect. What I didn't understand yet was that the neighborhood wasn't really run by families. It was run by the Holloways. Trevor Holloway, HOA president, developer's son, permanent smile stretched across the kind of face you instantly want to punch, but don't because you were raised right. His wife Vanessa acted like the neighborhood was some luxury resort she personally curated for Instagram. Then there was Dr. Martin Bellamy, cardiologist, treasurer of the HOA board, owner of the giant Creekside property everybody envied. And every single one of them lived on the high side of the neighborhood, where flooding somehow never touched their homes. Now me, I noticed things. Spent 40 years studying water pressure, drainage systems, sewer flow, flood control. You develop an eye for patterns. During my morning walks, I started realizing the runoff didn't make sense. Storm drains sloped wrong. Water barriers looked newer than the surrounding concrete. There were hidden channels behind decorative landscaping that redirected flow away from the Creekside mansions and toward the middle section where folks like me lived. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it. Then came the storm. Not even a hurricane, just one of those nasty Texas spring systems that hangs over you for 6 straight hours like the sky's got personal issues. Elaine woke me up around 2 in the morning because water was already creeping under the back door. I'll never forget the sound she made. Not screaming, worse than screaming. Confused fear. Like her mind suddenly couldn't understand where she was. By sunrise our garage was flooded, half the family photo albums were ruined, and Elaine sat wrapped in a blanket staring at muddy water like it had personally betrayed her. Meanwhile, I looked uphill toward Trevor Holloway's property and saw dry concrete. Bone dry. That was the moment something inside me hardened. See, I could tolerate rich people being arrogant. I could tolerate HOA letters whining about mailbox colors and lawn edging. But I could not tolerate people engineering flood damage onto working families just to protect their property values. So I built the wall. Not some ugly bunker either. I designed it properly, stacked limestone, internal drainage channels, reinforced footing, hidden runoff exits. Hell, I even added flower beds because Elaine liked tulips. Cost me nearly $9,000 and 3 weeks of aching knees. But when I finished, that thing looked better than half the landscaping in the neighborhood. And naturally, the HOA lost their minds. First came the passive-aggressive email. Concern regarding unauthorized exterior modifications. Then the certified violation notice. Then Trevor himself showed up one Saturday afternoon while I was sealing stone joints. He climbed out of his white Range Rover wearing loafers with no socks like every rich guy in Texas signed some secret agreement about it. Well now, he said, staring at the wall. That's certainly something. I wiped my hands on a rag. Appreciate it. Vanessa stepped out behind him wearing giant sunglasses even though it was cloudy. It looks very aggressive, Walter. Flood water usually is. Trevor smirked. You know this violates community aesthetic standards. No, it doesn't. You get architectural approval? I got county permits. That's not what I asked. I remember Elaine watching from the porch behind me, nervous the way she always got when voices started sharpening. So I kept mine calm. It's on my property. It's legal. End of story. Trevor walked closer, tapping the limestone with his knuckles. You know what this looks like? Looks like one of those prepper compounds people build before the government collapses. Vanessa laughed way too hard at that. Then Dr. Bellamy said the line that really stuck with me. What's next, Walter? Sandbags and barbed wire. All three of them laughing in my driveway, while my wife stood there clutching the porch rail, trying to remember why strangers were making fun of us. That does something to a man. Not rage exactly. Something colder. More patient. Trevor eventually stopped laughing long enough to point at me and say, 30 days. Remove it voluntarily or we'll escalate. Then they drove off like they'd already won. But here's the thing they didn't know yet. I had spent 20 years with the Army Corps helping investigate infrastructure fraud after natural disasters. And once you've spent enough time around corruption, you learn the biggest mistake guilty people make is assuming nobody's paying attention. That night after Elaine fell asleep, I sat in the garage with old survey maps spread across my workbench and started tracing runoff paths through the neighborhood. Every storm drain, every slope, every retaining wall. By midnight, I already knew two things for certain. First, somebody had illegally modified the drainage system. Second, they'd spent a hell of a lot of money doing it. And rich people don't spend that kind of money unless they're protecting something bigger. The next morning, I started digging into county records, and what I found made the flood wall dispute look like a parking ticket compared to what was really happening underneath Cypress Ridge Estates. By Tuesday afternoon, my garage looked less like a workshop and more like the evidence room from a detective movie. Survey maps pinned across plywood boards, drainage photos spread over the table, county permits stacked beside old engineering manuals, and right in the middle of all that mess sat Elaine, sipping tea and smiling softly while she folded grocery coupons like nothing unusual was happening. That's the thing about dementia. Some days it steals entire memories. Other days it gives you these little pockets of peace that feel almost cruel because you know they won't last. She looked up at me and said, "You're doing that stubborn face again, Walt." I laughed. "What's the stubborn face?" "The one you made before punching that mechanic in Tucson." "I did not punch that mechanic." "You absolutely did." Pause. "Did I win?" She smiled into her tea. "Oh, you definitely won." For a few seconds it felt normal again, like we were still us. Then my phone buzzed. HOA emergency meeting. Mandatory attendance. Of course. Trevor wasn't the type to let public humiliation marinate quietly. Men like him need audiences. They need rooms full of people nodding while they perform authority. So Thursday evening, I walked into the Cypress Ridge clubhouse carrying a thick binder under my arm, while Trevor Holloway stood near the podium shaking hands like he was running for governor. Vanessa floated around the room whispering to neighbors with that fake, concerned expression wealthy women practice in mirrors. The room smelled like burnt coffee and expensive perfume. Trevor spotted me immediately. "There he is," he announced, smiling too wide. "Our neighborhood survivalist." Couple nervous laughs. I sat down near the back beside Elaine and whispered, "This'll be quick." Trevor started with slides. Actual PowerPoint slides. Photos of my flood wall from dramatic angles, like he was presenting evidence at The Hague. "This unauthorized structure," he said, pointing at the screen, "creates visual inconsistency and potential runoff liability concerns for adjacent homeowners." I almost admired the audacity. The man illegally rerouted an entire drainage system and now wanted to lecture me about runoff. Vanessa chimed in next. "We all chose Cypress Ridge because of its aesthetic harmony." Aesthetic harmony. That's rich people language for people like Walter make us uncomfortable. Then Dr. Bellamy stood up adjusting his cufflinks. "If residents start constructing barriers without board approval, property values could decline." That one got some nods. Fear works well in neighborhoods like that. People with expensive homes are terrified of anything that threatens resale value, even common sense. Trevor looked directly at me. "Walter, before we proceed with enforcement action, would you like to explain why you felt HOA rules didn't apply to you?" And there it was. Not concern, not policy, humiliation, public obedience theater. I stood slowly, grabbed my binder, and walked to the front while every eye in the room followed me. "Well," I said, "I actually came tonight because I had a few questions myself." Trevor's smile tightened. I opened the binder. Question 1. Why does your pool extension violate county setback restrictions by 11 feet? The room went dead quiet. Trevor blinked. I flipped another page. Question 2. Why does Dr. Bellamy's retaining wall sit on protected runoff easement property? Bellamy shifted in his chair. Another page. And question 3. Why were 14 storm drainage modifications completed in this neighborhood over the past 3 years without city permits? Now people were whispering. Trevor tried recovering fast. This meeting isn't about. No, I interrupted calmly. This meeting's about drainage. I laid aerial photographs across the table. Old neighborhood plans beside current runoff maps. The difference was obvious even to people who knew nothing about engineering. Water used to flow naturally toward the creek basin. Now it curved around the Holloway and Bellamy properties before dumping downhill into middle-income sections like mine. One older guy in the back leaned forward and muttered, "Son of a bitch." Exactly. Trevor's face lost color for the first time since I'd met him. "These are baseless accusations," Vanessa snapped. "No, ma'am," I said. "These are county records." Dr. Bellamy stood up too quickly. "You're implying criminal misconduct over drainage adjustments." I looked him right in the eyes. "I'm implying somebody spent around 200 grand redirecting floodwater away from wealthy homeowners and onto working families." The room exploded into overlapping voices. People started connecting dots fast. Flooded garages. Foundation damage. Insurance increases. Foreclosures. One woman near the window suddenly said, "Wait, the Garcias lost their house after the 2021 flood." Another voice, "And Holloway Development bought it." Then another, "And the Reynolds place too." Trevor slammed his palm against the podium. Enough. But the spell had broken. People weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at him. And for powerful people, that's the moment panic starts. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Trevor adjourned early, claiming legal review was necessary, but nobody really listened. Neighbors crowded around my maps, while Vanessa hurried toward the exit like the room suddenly smelled bad. Outside, storm clouds rolled low across the Texas sky. Bellamy caught up with me near the parking lot. "You should be very careful making accusations like this," he said quietly. "Or what?" He stepped closer. "People with resources can make life difficult." I laughed softly. "Martin, I spent 30 years unclogging municipal sewer systems. You think rich people threatening me is new?" He didn't laugh. Neither did I. The next morning I got my first visit from the city. White truck. Building inspector. Clipboard. Trevor standing behind him, pretending not to look excited. The inspector introduced himself as Raul Mendoza, looked tired enough to qualify as legally deceased. "Received a complaint regarding unpermitted electrical installation," he said. "Happy to show you everything." Trevor folded his arms while Mendoza spent nearly an hour inspecting my flood wall lighting, drainage channels, conduit lines, all of it. Finally, Mendoza straightened up and said, "Honestly, this works cleaner than half the commercial jobs I inspect." Trevor nearly choked. I handed Mendoza my permits. Electrical certification. Engineering approval. Final inspection stamps. Every page neatly organized. Mendoza nodded slowly. "Everything checks out." I could actually hear Trevor grinding his teeth. Then I said, "While you're here, mind taking a look at something else?" That got his attention. I walked them behind the neighborhood runoff channel and started pointing things out one by one. Fresh concrete. Artificial slope changes. Hidden diverters under decorative rock beds. Mendoza crouched near one culvert for a long moment before saying quietly, "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." "Illegal?" "Oh yeah." Trevor jumped in immediately. "Those modifications were existing infrastructure." Mendoza shook his head. "No, sir. Concrete aging says otherwise. This is recent work." Then came the sentence that changed everything. "Unauthorized municipal drainage alteration can trigger state environmental review." Trevor went pale. Bellamy looked like he might throw up. Because once government agencies start sniffing around environmental fraud, things move differently. Bigger penalties. Criminal exposure. Federal attention. And deep down they knew they'd built too much to hide. After Mendoza left, Trevor stayed behind in my driveway. No smile now. No jokes. "Walter," he said carefully, "maybe we can settle this privately." I leaned against the wall. "Privately how?" "You keep your structure. We withdraw enforcement." "And the flooding?" His jaw flexed. "That's a complicated issue." "No," I said. "It's actually pretty simple." I stepped closer. "You redirected water onto families who couldn't afford the damage. That's not what happened." "You sure about that?" Silence. Then Trevor lowered his voice. "You have no idea how expensive flood mitigation is for this neighborhood. There it was. The truth peeking out. Not community protection. Asset protection. Property values. Investments. The Creekside homes were worth millions collectively. Flood risk wouldn't oppose. VE crushed resale prices. So they moved the problem downhill where regular folks would absorb the losses quietly. I stared at him for a long moment and said, "You know the worst part?" He frowned. "You could have just told people the truth." Trevor scoffed. "People panic." "No," I said softly. "Greedy people panic." That weekend things escalated fast. Legal papers arrived Saturday morning while Elaine and I were eating pancakes. Temporary restraining order. Demand for wall removal. Claims my barrier endangered neighboring properties. I sat there reading the packet while maple syrup cooled on my plate, and honestly, I started laughing. Elaine looked worried. "Bad news." "Depends who you ask." Then Sunday evening, right when I thought the situation couldn't get stranger, my doorbell rang. Standing there was a 74-year-old retired librarian named Dorothy Keller holding 2 banker boxes full of documents. "Mr. Grady," she said, "I believe your neighbors are committing organized fraud." Now that's not a sentence you expect before dinner. Dorothy stepped inside, set the boxes on my table, and started unpacking years of property records, flood claims, foreclosure filings, and development purchases with the calm precision of a woman who'd spent decades organizing chaos for a living. Turns out while I'd been studying water flow, Dorothy had been studying money. And according to her research, Trevor Holloway's development company had quietly purchased 16 flood-damaged homes over the past 3 years, all from the exact sections suddenly experiencing increased runoff after the drainage modifications. Buy low after flood damage. Renovate. Flip high. Repeat. My stomach turned cold. This wasn't just about protecting their homes, I muttered. Dorothy adjusted her glasses. "No, Walter, this was a business model." Then she handed me the document that changed everything. An internal contractor invoice from Holloway Development labeled Emergency Watershed Diversion Project. No permits attached. No city authorization. No environmental review. Just signatures. And suddenly the whole picture snapped into focus so clearly it made me sick. They weren't just corrupt. They were manufacturing flood damage for profit. I didn't sleep much after Dorothy Keller left that night. Hard to sleep when you realize the people running your neighborhood might actually be engineering disasters for profit. Elaine drifted off around midnight in her recliner while some old black and white movie played quietly in the background, and I just sat there at the kitchen table staring at contractor invoices and runoff diagrams while thunder rolled somewhere far off over the hills. Funny thing about getting older, your sense of fear changes. When you're young, you're scared of getting hurt. When you're old, you're scared of running out of time before doing the right thing. By Monday morning, I'd made up my mind. If Trevor Holloway and his people wanted war, fine. But I wasn't going to fight like them. No vandalism. No sabotage. No anonymous threats. I was simply going to give the water back its original path. And nature could handle the rest. Now, before anybody in the comments loses their mind, let me explain something. Those illegal pump systems they installed were already forcing stormwater uphill through redirected channels using automated pressure controls. The entire neighborhood drainage network had basically been turned into one giant engineered cheat code protecting wealthy properties. All I planned to do was disable the cheating. That's it. I called an old friend named Leon Baxter, former Corps engineer, smartest hydraulic systems guy I ever worked with. Leon drove down Tuesday afternoon in a rusted Ford truck that looked held together by coffee and bad decisions. He climbed out chewing sunflower seeds and stared at my maps for maybe 30 seconds before saying, "Oh, these boys are screwed." "Glad you're optimistic." "No, Walt. I mean federally screwed." For the next 2 days, we traced utility access points and pump control routes through the neighborhood. Leon confirmed what I already suspected. Trevor's crew had installed a centralized automated pump relay system behind Bellamy's property near the creek basin. One control unit. One override network. One weak point. And because rich people always assume service workers are invisible, security around the equipment was laughable. Thursday night, Leon leaned back in my garage chair and asked, "You sure about this?" "I'm sure they flooded my wife." He nodded once. That was enough. The storm rolled in Sunday evening right on schedule. Texas storms have personalities sometimes. This one felt angry before the first drop even fell. The air turned heavy around dusk. Tree branches bent sideways, and the sky went green-gray like bruised metal. Meanwhile, the HOA had scheduled a neighborhood social at the clubhouse because apparently Trevor Holloway thought public relations could stop weather. By 6 o'clock, half the neighborhood was there. Potato salad, cheap wine, fake smiling. Trevor worked the room shaking hands while Vanessa floated around pretending nothing was wrong. Dr. Bellamy looked tense enough to crack teeth. And me? I sat near the back beside Elaine holding her hand while thunder rattled the windows. Trevor eventually tapped his glass. Before dinner, he announced, the board would like to address ongoing misinformation being spread regarding neighborhood infrastructure. Here we go. He launched into this polished speech about unity and responsible communication while rain started tapping against the roof harder and harder. Then he pointed at me. Unfortunately, certain residents have chosen fear-mongering over cooperation. Elaine squeezed my hand. He means you. Yes, sweetheart, I gathered that. A few nervous chuckles nearby. Trevor kept going. These reckless accusations have created unnecessary hostility and legal exposure for our community. I stood up slowly. You done? His smile tightened. Excuse me. You've talked plenty. My turn. The room got quiet. Outside, lightning flashed bright enough to light the whole clubhouse blue for half a second. I walked to the front carrying Dorothy's documents and laid them across the banquet table. Flood records, property acquisitions, pump installation invoices. Everything. You told this neighborhood my wall was dangerous, I said calmly. Turns out the dangerous thing was the system you built underneath everybody's feet. Trevor laughed too quickly. That's absurd. Is it? I held up the contractor invoice. Emergency watershed diversion project. No smile now. People crowded closer. I pointed toward the rain hammering the windows. Water used to flow naturally through Cypress Ridge. Then somebody redirected it away from expensive homes and into working-class sections. After flood damage lowered property values, Holloway Development started buying houses cheap. Vanessa stepped forward. You can't prove intent. Dorothy Keller stood up from the back. Actually stood up like a courtroom witness. Oh, I believe he can. Everybody turned. That tiny retired librarian walked forward holding a folder thicker than a Bible, including foreclosure timing, flood insurance cancellations, resale profits, and permit avoidance documentation. Trevor's face looked like wet drywall. Then the lights flickered. Hard. Thunder cracked directly overhead. And suddenly, every phone in the room started buzzing. Flash flood warning. Seek higher ground immediately. The timing almost felt cinematic. Outside, water was already pooling across the parking lot. Trevor checked his phone and frowned. Then it rang. He answered casually at first. That changed fast. What do you mean the lower levels flooding? Dr. Bellamy's phone rang next. Then Vanessa's. Within maybe 30 seconds, all three of them looked genuinely terrified. And right then, right at that exact moment, Leon's override timer activated. See, earlier that afternoon we disabled the illegal pressure diversions and restored natural drainage sequencing through the original runoff channels. No rerouting, no sabotage, just gravity finally allowed to behave honestly again. The problem for Trevor was simple. His entire flood protection setup depended on stolen runoff pressure being continuously redirected away from his section. The second nature reclaimed the original flow path. All that backed up water came home. Fast. Outside somebody yelled, "Holy hell." People rushed toward the windows. Water poured downhill through the creekside streets like somebody dumped a lake out of the sky. Trevor's precious culverts overloaded almost instantly because they'd never been designed to handle natural retention volume anymore. And meanwhile, the middle neighborhood stayed mostly dry. My wall held perfectly. Water flowed around it exactly how it was supposed to. No panic. No flooding. Just controlled runoff. Trevor shoved past people toward the exit. Move. Vanessa was already crying. Bellamy looked close to cardiac arrest himself. Half the neighborhood followed them outside into absolute chaos. Rain slammed sideways across the pavement while emergency sirens echoed somewhere nearby. Water surged over Trevor's driveway and straight through his garage doors. I won't lie to you. Seeing that man standing ankle-deep in floodwater screaming at contractors over the phone felt real satisfying. The poetic kind of satisfying. News crews arrived maybe 20 minutes later because apparently somebody inside the clubhouse had already tipped off local media about the investigation. One reporter marched through the rain holding an umbrella that kept flipping inside out, while cameramen filmed the flooding behind her. Trevor spotted me near the sidewalk and completely lost control. "This is your fault," he screamed. Camera instantly turned toward us. "You tampered with private infrastructure." I looked at him calmly while rain soaked both of us. "No, Trevor," I said. "I stopped you from tampering with public infrastructure. You flooded my home." "No," I replied softly. "You flooded your own home 2 years ago. It just took the water a while to return the favor." That line ended up everywhere online by morning. Bellamy tried saving furniture while water poured through his basement windows. Vanessa stood crying beside an SUV with water halfway up the tires. Trevor kept shouting about lawsuits nobody cared about anymore. And all around them, neighbors just watched. Not cheering, not helping much either. Just watching the illusion collapse in real time. Because once people realized power was fake all along, they stopped bowing to it surprisingly fast. Investigations moved quickly after the storm. Too quickly for Trevor to contain. State environmental agencies showed up first. Then county engineers. Then eventually federal investigators once the wetland permit violations surfaced. Turns out Dorothy's paperwork was devastating. Holloway Development had manipulated flood maps, hidden drainage modifications, suppressed disclosure requirements, and profited directly from flood damage property turnover. By the end of summer, the fines alone were astronomical. Trevor resigned from the HOA before criminal charges officially landed, though everybody knew it was coming. Bellamy settled civil lawsuits quietly and moved out before winter. Vanessa disappeared from social media entirely, which honestly may have been the greatest tragedy of all for her. And the neighborhood? Well, that's where things got complicated. Some people treated me like a hero. Others thought I'd gone too far. Even now, there are folks in Cypress Ridge who think I should have just sued quietly instead of exposing everything publicly during a storm. Maybe they're right. Maybe there was a cleaner way. But here's the part people don't understand unless they've watched someone they love sit trembling in floodwater, unable to remember why they're afraid. Some damage changes you permanently. Elaine had one especially clear evening a few weeks after everything ended. We sat beside the flood wall, watching runoff move safely through the restored channels while sunset lit the limestone gold. She leaned against my shoulder and said, "You fixed it." I swallowed hard. "Trying to." "No," she whispered, smiling softly. "You fixed the mean people." And man, I'm not ashamed to admit that one almost broke me. Because in the end, this was never really about water. It was about what happens when powerful people decide regular families are acceptable collateral damage. It was about a community so obsessed with appearances they ignored corruption sitting right under their lawns. And honestly, I still think about Trevor Holloway sometimes. About whether he ever understood the moment he truly lost. It wasn't when the investigators arrived. Wasn't when the cameras filmed his flooded mansion. Wasn't even when the lawsuits hit. No, he lost the second he looked at an old man trying to protect his sick wife and saw somebody weak enough to humiliate publicly. That was the fatal mistake. Because there's something dangerous about people who've spent their whole lives fixing broken systems. Eventually, they stop being afraid to tear one apart. So now I want to ask you something. If you found out your neighborhood leaders were secretly hurting working families to protect wealthy homeowners, would you expose them publicly no matter the consequences? Or do you think I crossed a line the moment I interfered with that drainage system? Be honest down in the comments, because I've seen people split right down the middle on this story. And if you enjoyed this one, hit subscribe. Because trust me, Cypress Ridge wasn't the only neighborhood hiding ugly secrets underneath perfectly trimmed grass.